She polished the marble with the same grace she once used to sign million-dollar deals, but he saw only the color of her skin and the mop in her hands, until the phone call that would destroy everything he thought he knew. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The crystal chandelier cast rainbow prisms across the Grandview Hotel's marble lobby, each sparkle a testament to the luxury that Daniel Morrison had built his career protecting. At 34, he moved through the five-star establishment with the confident stride of a man who had never questioned his place at the top. His tailored navy suit, polished leather shoes, and platinum watch spoke a language of success that everyone in his world understood and respected. Daniel paused at the concierge desk, scanning the morning reports with the practiced eye of someone who had climbed from assistant manager to general manager in just 8 years. Every detail mattered in the luxury hospitality business, every smudge on a window, every wrinkle in a tablecloth, every second of delayed service could cost them a 5-star review. Richardson, he called to his assistant manager, his voice carrying the authority that came naturally after years of commanding respect. I want housekeeping reports on my desk by 9. The Pemberton family arrives tonight, and if there's so much as a speck of dust in the presidential suite. Already handled, sir, Richardson replied, his deference automatic. Daniel nodded approvingly. This was his domain, his carefully constructed world where order prevailed and everyone knew their place. 3 floors below, in the service corridors that guests never saw, Zara Williams pushed her cleaning cart with practiced efficiency. Her movements held an unexpected elegance, the way she folded towels in perfect thirds, how she arranged cleaning supplies with almost ritualistic precision, the gentle care she took with even the humblest of tasks. At 28, Zara possessed a quiet beauty that no uniform could diminish. Her dark eyes held depths that spoke of experiences far beyond her current circumstances, and when she smiled, which she did often, despite everything, it was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She hummed softly as she worked, an old spiritual her grandmother used to sing, "Wade in the water, children." The melody echoed off the narrow walls of the service hallway, adding warmth to the sterile space. "Morning, Zara," called Maria, another housekeeper rushing past with arms full of linens. "You're on 15 today, the executive floor." "Thank you," Zara replied, her voice carrying traces of refinement that seemed oddly placed in these utilitarian corridors. She had learned to soften her natural speaking voice, to make herself smaller, less noticeable. Invisibility was safer. As she prepared her cart for the executive floor, Zara's phone buzzed. The screen showed a familiar number, but she let it ring. Some calls were too dangerous to answer while she was working. Some parts of her life needed to remain buried, at least for now. The elevator ride to the 15th floor was silent except for the mechanical hum of machinery. Zara watched the numbers climb, each floor carrying her higher into Daniel Morrison's domain, though she had no idea that within hours, their worlds would collide in ways neither could imagine. The elevator doors opened to reveal the executive floor's opulent hallway, cream marble, gold accents, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted its worth. Zara stepped out, her cartwheels gliding silently across the polished floor. She had learned the art of moving like a ghost through spaces where she didn't belong, of being present but unseen, necessary but unnoticed. It was a survival skill she had perfected over the past 6 months, ever since she had traded her corner office for cleaning supplies and chosen invisibility over the life that had nearly destroyed her. What she didn't know was that today, invisibility would fail her completely. Have you ever felt invisible in a place where you knew you belonged? Share in the comments what gave you the strength to reclaim your worth. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive lounge as Zara methodically dusted the mahogany conference table. Each movement was deliberate, respectful. She understood that this furniture cost more than most people's cars. The rich scent of leather and polished wood filled the air, a stark contrast to the harsh chemical smell of her cleaning supplies. She was reaching across the table to clean the far edge when her phone slipped from her apron pocket, clattering onto the marble floor. The sound echoed through the quiet space like a gunshot. "Damn," she whispered, quickly bending to retrieve it. As she straightened, the phone began ringing, that same persistent number she'd been avoiding all morning. The name on the screen made her stomach tighten. Pemberton Holdings, CEO office. Her hand trembled slightly as she stared at the display. She couldn't answer. Not here, not now, not while wearing this uniform in Daniel Morrison's hotel. But the phone kept ringing, its shrill tone seeming to grow louder with each passing second. Just let it ring, she told herself. Let it go to voicemail like all the others. But something in her chest tightened with each ring. The weight of who she used to be pressed against the careful walls she'd built around her new identity. What the hell is going on here? The voice cracked through the air like a whip. Zara spun around to find Daniel Morrison standing in the doorway, his perfectly pressed suit and stern expression radiating authority and barely contained irritation. His eyes moved from her face to the still-ringing phone in her hand, then to the cleaning cart, cataloguing everything with the precision of a prosecutor building a case. Zara began, quickly declining the call and sliding the phone back into her pocket. Personal calls during work hours. Daniel stepped into the room, his polished shoes clicking against the marble with each measured step. In the executive lounge? Do you have any idea what kind of standards we maintain here? The phone began ringing again. Zara's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she kept her voice steady. Sir, I apologize. It was an accident. I was just what? Taking a break from actually doing your job. Daniel's voice rose, drawing the attention of several executives who had been passing in the hallway. They gathered at the doorway like spectators at an accident, their expensive suits and curious faces forming a wall of judgment. The ringing stopped, only to start again immediately. Turn that damn thing off, Daniel commanded, his voice carrying through the growing audience. Better yet, give it to me. Maybe a day without your phone will teach you about appropriate workplace behavior. Sir, please. Zara's voice remained calm, but something flickered in her dark eyes, a flash of the woman she used to be, the one who had commanded boardrooms and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. I can handle this quietly. There's no need to. No need to what? Hold you accountable. Daniel moved closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. You people always have excuses, don't you? Always looking for the easy way out instead of taking responsibility. The words hung in the air like poison. You people. The phrase hit Zara like a physical blow. She had heard it before, whispered in corporate corridors, implied in boardroom silences, delivered with the same casual cruelty that Daniel had just displayed. But hearing it now, while she stood in a cleaning uniform with a cart full of supplies, felt different. Worse. The phone rang again. I said turn it off. Daniel's patience finally snapped. He lunged forward and grabbed for the phone, his fingers closing around Zara's wrist with enough force to make her gasp. In the struggle, the phone flew from her hand, skittering across the marble floor to land at the feet of the watching executives. The screen lit up with the incoming call, and in the deadly silence that followed, everyone could see the name displayed in bold letters. Pemberton Holdings, CEO Office. Urgent, board meeting in 30 minutes. Daniel's grip on Zara's wrist loosened as confusion flickered across his features. What kind of sick joke is this? Did you program some fake number to try and impress people? But before Zara could answer, the phone stopped ringing and immediately buzzed with a text message. Then another. Then another. The notifications came in rapid succession, each one lighting up the screen. Ms. Pemberton, the board is waiting for your decision on the Morrison Hotel acquisition. Zara, please call back. The shareholders are getting restless. Your father's legacy is at stake. We need you back. The color drained from Daniel's face as he read the messages. Around the doorway, the murmur of confused voices grew louder. That's impossible, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of his own racing heartbeat. Zara slowly pulled her wrist free from his loosened grip, rubbing the red marks his fingers had left on her dark skin. When she looked up, her eyes held a sadness so profound it seemed to fill the room. You're right, Mr. Morrison, she said quietly, her voice carrying a dignity that no uniform could strip away. It is impossible. It's impossible that the daughter of James Pemberton, the man whose hotel chain you've been trying to buy for 3 years, will be standing in your executive lounge wearing a cleaning uniform. It's impossible that she would let you grab her, humiliate her, and call her you people without saying a word. She bent down and picked up her phone, her movements graceful despite the tremor in her hands. "But here we are," she continued, looking directly into Daniel's shocked eyes. "And the impossible has happened. So now you need to ask yourself, what kind of man are you, really? And what kind of world have we built where this could happen?" The silence that followed was deafening. In the doorway, executives exchanged glances of dawning recognition. Some had seen Zara Pemberton's photo in business magazines. Others had heard whispers about the mysterious disappearance of the hotel heiress 6 months ago. Daniel stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he had just learned. The woman he had just humiliated, the woman he had grabbed and berated in front of his staff, wasn't just any employee. She was Zara Pemberton. And she owned the company that could destroy his career with a single phone call. Sometimes our worst moments reveal who we really are. What do you think Daniel should do next? Can someone truly change after crossing such a line? Let us know in the comments. The executive lounge had never felt smaller. Daniel stood motionless, his mind reeling as the weight of his actions crashed down on him like an avalanche. Around the doorway, his staff members shifted uncomfortably, some pulling out their phones to undoubtedly research the woman they had just watched their boss humiliate. Zara straightened her uniform with deliberate care, each movement controlled and precise. The phone in her hand buzzed again, but she ignored it, her dark eyes fixed on Daniel's pale face. "I need to get back to work," she said quietly, her voice carrying an odd formality that made the silence even more oppressive. "These rooms won't clean themselves." "Wait," Daniel's voice cracked slightly. "You can't just. I mean, we need to talk about." "About what, Mr. Morrison?" Zara's tone was perfectly professional, but there was steel beneath the silk. "About how you treated one of your employees. About the things you said? Or about the fact that you've been trying to acquire my family's hotel chain for 3 years without knowing what I look like?" Daniel's throat felt like sandpaper. Around them, the gathered executives began to disperse, but he could feel their eyes, their whispered conversations that would spread through the hotel like wildfire within the hour. "This is impossible," he muttered, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. "Zara Pemberton disappeared 6 months ago. There were investigations, search parties. The business world went crazy trying to figure out where she went. You can't be." "Can't be what? Black? Poor? Working as a cleaner in your hotel?" Zara's voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "What exactly can't I be, Mr. Morrison?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it, realizing that anything he said would only dig his grave deeper. His career, everything he had worked for, was crumbling around him, and he couldn't seem to find solid ground. "Look," he said finally, lowering his voice and taking a step toward her. "Obviously, there's been a massive misunderstanding here. I had no idea who you were. If you could just stop." Zara held up her hand, and the simple gesture carried more authority than all his shouting had. "Don't you dare stand there and pretend this was about identity. You didn't humiliate me because you didn't know I was Zara Pemberton. You humiliated me because you thought I was just a black cleaning lady who didn't matter." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. Daniel felt his carefully constructed world, his certainties, his prejudices, his sense of righteous authority, shifting beneath his feet. "That's not. I'm not a racist," he said weakly, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew how hollow they sounded. Zara's laugh held no humor. "No? Then tell me, Mr. Morrison, would you have grabbed a white employee's wrist like that? Would you have said "you people" to someone who looked like you? Would you have made such assumptions about their character, their work ethic, their worth? Each question was a scalpel, cutting away his defenses layer by layer. Daniel's jaw tightened. Part of him, the part that had been conditioned by years of privilege and unexamined assumptions, wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain away what had happened. But a deeper part, the part that had watched his own actions unfold like a nightmare, knew she was right. "I need to call my lawyer," he said suddenly, his business instincts kicking in. "And my publicist. If this gets out." "When this gets out," Zara corrected quietly. "And it will get out, Mr. Morrison. In about 20 minutes, I have a board meeting where I'll be asked to make a final decision about whether Pemberton Holdings should acquire Morrison Hotels. What do you think I should tell them?" The color drained from Daniel's face completely. The acquisition deal. It wasn't just about this hotel. It was about his entire chain, his investors, hundreds of employees who depended on him. His mind raced through the implications: financial ruin, public humiliation, career suicide. "You can't," he whispered. "One mistake can't destroy everything I've built. I have people depending on me. Families who. One mistake." Zara's voice rose for the first time, and the sound was like thunder breaking through silence. "One mistake? You think what happened here was a single error in judgment?" She took a step toward him, and Daniel instinctively backed away. "This wasn't a mistake, Mr. Morrison. This was who you are when you think no one important is watching. This was your truth, revealed when you thought you were dealing with someone you considered beneath you." Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. "I'm calling emergency legal counsel. There has to be a way to fix this. Some kind of settlement, confidentiality agreement. You think you can buy your way out of this?" Zara's voice was incredulous. "You think money can erase what I felt when you grabbed my wrist? When you looked at me like I was nothing? When you reduced me to a stereotype in front of your entire staff? What do you want from me?" Daniel's professional composure finally cracked completely. "You want me to grovel? To beg? Fine. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry I didn't recognize you. I'm sorry I made assumptions. I'm sorry the whole thing happened. What else can I do?" The desperation in his voice filled the room, but Zara's expression remained unchanged. "You're not sorry about what you did, Mr. Morrison. You're sorry about who you did it to. And that," she said, picking up her cleaning supplies with renewed purpose, "is exactly the problem." She began pushing her cart toward the door, moving with the same quiet dignity she had maintained throughout the entire encounter. "Wait," Daniel called after her, panic rising in his chest. "Please. There has to be something, some way to make this right. Name your price. Anything." Zara paused at the doorway without turning around. "The board meeting starts in 15 minutes, Mr. Morrison. I suggest you spend that time thinking about whether you can live with the man I've seen you really are." And with that, she was gone, leaving Daniel alone in the executive lounge with the shattered remains of his certainty and the growing realization that some things couldn't be bought, intimidated, or managed away. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of his phone buzzing with an incoming call from his lawyer, his publicist, and half a dozen board members who had undoubtedly already heard whispers of what had transpired. Daniel stared at the doorway where Zara had disappeared, knowing that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't yet comprehend, and that the woman he had tried to diminish might very well hold his entire future in her hands. What would you do if you had the power to destroy someone who had humiliated you? Is revenge ever justified, or should we always choose forgiveness? Share your thoughts below. The Pemberton Holdings boardroom occupied the entire 42nd floor of the gleaming downtown tower that had been James Pemberton's crown jewel. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city below, including the Grand View Hotel where Daniel Morrison was undoubtedly spiraling into panic. Zara sat at the head of the massive oak conference table, having changed from her cleaning uniform into a charcoal business suit that transformed her completely. Her hair, freed from the modest bun she'd worn while cleaning, fell in elegant waves around her shoulders. But despite the external transformation, her hand still trembled slightly as she gripped her coffee cup. "Ms. Pemberton," said Harold Whitman, the silver-haired head of acquisitions, "we've been waiting 6 months for your decision on the Morrison Hotel's purchase. The shareholders are getting restless, and frankly, some are questioning whether your extended absence has affected your judgment." 12 pairs of eyes stared at her from around the table, men in expensive suits who had known her father, who had watched her grow up in boardrooms like this one, who had been both allies and adversaries in the complex dance of corporate power. "My judgment is fine, Harold," Zara replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I've spent the last 6 months conducting the most thorough due diligence investigation in this company's history. By working as a cleaning lady." The question came from Marcus Chen, the chief financial officer, his tone dripping with barely concealed disdain. "Zara, I understand you've been through trauma since your father's death, but this sabbatical has cost us millions in delayed decisions. Zara's phone buzzed against the table. Another call from Daniel Morrison. She declined it without looking. The Morrison acquisition, she said, pulling up the files on her tablet, represents a $2.8 billion investment in a man who... She paused, seeing Daniel's face in her mind, not the polished executive she'd researched for months, but the man who had grabbed her wrist 2 hours ago. Who may not align with our company values. Company values. Harold laughed. Zara, this is business, not Sunday school. Daniel Morrison has built a profitable empire. His personal character is irrelevant as long as the numbers work. Is it? Zara stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city where thousands of people went about their daily lives, invisible to the power players in rooms like this. When did we decide that character doesn't matter? That how a person treats those beneath them is irrelevant to their fitness as a business partner. Her phone rang again. Daniel Morrison, persistent in his desperation. Answer it, Harold said suddenly. Morrison's been calling board members all morning. He's clearly panicked about something. Maybe we can leverage his desperation to get a better price. Zara's finger hovered over the accept button. Every instinct told her to let it ring, to maintain the distance between who she was now and who she had been 2 hours ago. But the board was watching, waiting, and some decisions couldn't be avoided forever. She answered the call and put it on speaker. Ms. Pemberton. Daniel's voice filled the boardroom, tight with barely controlled panic. Thank you for taking my call. I need to speak with you immediately about the acquisition discussions. You're on speaker, Mr. Morrison, Zara said coolly. My board is here. Say whatever you need to say. There was a pause, and she could almost hear him calculating, trying to figure out how much she had told them. There's been a misunderstanding at my hotel this morning. A serious one. I need the opportunity to explain, to make things right before any final decisions are made about our business relationship. Harold leaned forward, his predatory instincts activated. What kind of misunderstanding, Morrison? Are we talking about a PR issue? Legal liability? The board needs to know what we're potentially acquiring. Another pause. Longer this time. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. I treated one of my employees inappropriately. There was a confrontation, and I said things, did things that were completely unacceptable. If it becomes public, it could damage both our companies. The board members exchanged glances. This was the kind of information that could tank stock prices and destroy reputations. How inappropriate? Marcus asked, pulling out his phone to likely start damage control research. Zara watched the men around the table, seeing how quickly they shifted into crisis management mode. They didn't care about the human cost of Daniel's actions, only about the financial implications. I need to meet with Ms. Pemberton in person, Daniel continued, desperation creeping into his voice. Please. Give me 1 hour to explain, to show you that I'm not the man you saw today. The acquisition, the jobs, everything depends on it. Absolutely not, Harold said immediately. If you've created a liability issue. I'll meet with him, Zara said quietly. The room fell silent. Zara, Marcus said carefully, if Morrison has done something that could expose us to legal risk. 1 hour, she said, looking directly at Harold. Private meeting. Then I'll make my final decision about the acquisition. Where? Daniel's voice came through the speaker, a mixture of relief and terror. The Grandview Hotel, Zara replied, and she could almost hear his sharp intake of breath. The executive lounge where it all started. If you want to convince me that you're not the man I met this morning, then prove it on your own territory. Ms. Pemberton, Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper, I don't understand. How do you know what happened in the executive lounge? Did someone tell you about? The silence stretched out like a tightrope. I know, Zara said finally, because I was there, Mr. Morrison. I was the employee you grabbed. I was the woman you called you people. I was the one cleaning your floors while you've spent 3 years trying to buy my father's company. The boardroom erupted in shocked murmurs, but Zara's eyes remained fixed on the phone. That's impossible. Daniel's voice was barely audible. 1 hour. Mr. Morrison. Executive Lounge. Come alone. And come prepared to show me who you really are when everything is stripped away. Because right now, the future of both our companies rests on whether you can prove you're capable of being better than the man I met today. She ended the call and looked around the table at 12 stunned faces. The meeting is in 45 minutes, she said, gathering her files. I suggest you all prepare for either a merger or a very public explanation of why Pemberton Holdings refuses to do business with Daniel Morrison. As she walked toward the door, Harold called after her. Zara, this is madness. You're letting personal feelings cloud business judgment. She paused at the doorway, her hand on the handle. Maybe, Harold. Or maybe I'm finally learning to see the difference between profit and principle. We'll find out which one matters more in about an hour. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt endless. In 45 minutes, she would face Daniel Morrison again, not as a cleaning lady who could disappear into invisibility, but as herself. As the woman who held his future in her hands. The question wasn't whether she had the power to destroy him. The question was whether he had the capacity to become someone worth saving. And despite everything, despite the humiliation, the prejudice, the casual cruelty, some small part of her hoped he did. The executive lounge felt different now, smaller, more intimate, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Daniel sat alone at the mahogany conference table, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. His tie hung loose, his hair was mussed from nervous hands running through it, and his expensive suit looked like he'd slept in it despite the fact that only 4 hours had passed since the morning's confrontation. The door opened with a soft click, and Zara entered wearing the same charcoal business suit from the board meeting. But something had changed in her demeanor, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before, as if the armor of corporate power couldn't quite shield her from the memories this room held. Ms. Pemberton, Daniel stood quickly, nearly knocking over his chair. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I, Zara admitted, taking the seat across from him, the same spot where she had been cleaning the table 12 hours earlier. But some conversations can't be avoided forever. They sat in silence for a moment, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows and casting long shadows across the polished surface between them. I need to know why, Daniel said finally. Why were you working as a cleaner? Why disappear from your life, your company, everything you built? The whole business world has been speculating for months. Zara's fingers traced the edge of the table, following the grain of the expensive wood. You want to understand why someone like me would choose invisibility over power? Yes. She was quiet for a long time, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of old pain. 6 months ago, I was sitting in a boardroom just like this one, negotiating the acquisition of a small hotel chain in South Carolina. Family-owned, third generation, struggling to compete with the big corporations. Her voice grew softer. The owners were an elderly black couple, the Washingtons. They'd built something beautiful, something that mattered to their community, but the numbers weren't working anymore. Daniel leaned forward, sensing the importance of what she was sharing. I offered them fair market value, maybe even a little more. But my board wanted a hostile takeover, wanted to gut the property, fire the staff, rebuild it as a luxury resort that the local community could never afford. She looked up at him, and her eyes held depths of regret. I went along with it. I told myself it was just business, that sentiment couldn't drive decisions in corporate America. What happened? The morning we finalized the hostile takeover, Mr. Washington had a heart attack. Right there in his lawyer's office, watching everything his family had built for 60 years disappear into corporate machinery. Zara's voice cracked slightly. He died 3 days later. The silence that followed felt sacred, heavy with the weight of consequence. His widow, Mrs. Washington, came to my office afterward. She was wearing this simple black dress, probably the same one she wore to church every Sunday. And she looked at me, looked right through me, and said, "Child, I hope you never have to learn what it feels like to be invisible to someone who has the power to see you." Daniel felt something twist in his chest, a recognition he didn't want to acknowledge. She said that power without compassion isn't strength, it's just cruelty dressed up in expensive suits. and that until I understood what it felt like to be dismissed, diminished, treated as less than human by someone who saw only what I could provide for them. Zara's voice trailed off. You decided to find out, Daniel finished quietly. I walked out of my office that day and didn't come back. Told my assistant to cancel everything, liquidate my personal assets, and find me a job where nobody would know who I was. Where I could learn what it felt like to be truly invisible. She stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. For 6 months, I've worked jobs where people looked through me like I was furniture. I've been dismissed, ignored, treated like my thoughts and feelings didn't matter because of the color of my skin, because of the uniform I wore, because of assumptions people made about my worth. Daniel's throat felt tight. And today? Today you showed me exactly what Mrs. Washington was talking about. You looked at me and saw only what you expected to see, not a person, not someone with thoughts and feelings and dignity, but a problem to be managed, a stereotype to be controlled. She turned back to face him, and the pain in her eyes was raw, unguarded. When you grabbed my wrist, when you said you people, when you assumed I was looking for an excuse to avoid responsibility. She paused, composing herself. I felt what Mr. Washington must have felt when my board decided his life's work was disposable. I understood what his widow meant about invisibility. Daniel stood slowly, his legs feeling unsteady. Zara, God, I don't know what to say. I had no idea about any of this. That's exactly the point, she said. You had no idea because you never bothered to see me as anything more than what I appeared to be on the surface. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different, not empty, but full of possibility for understanding. I called Mrs. Washington last week, Zara continued. Asked her if she thought 6 months was enough time for someone like me to truly understand what she tried to teach me. What did she say? A small smile touched Zara's lips, the first genuine smile Daniel had seen from her all day. She said, "Child, the learning never stops. But the real question is, now that you know what it feels like to be invisible, what are you going to do to make sure others never have to feel that way?" Daniel sank back into his chair, the full weight of the morning's events finally settling on him like a physical burden. I've spent my entire career building walls, he said quietly. Protecting my position, my authority, my assumptions about how the world works. I never questioned whether those walls were keeping out people who deserved to be seen. And now? He looked up at her, and for the first time that day, his expression was completely honest. Now I'm terrified that I've spent 34 years becoming someone I don't recognize. Someone who could look at a person like you and see only what I wanted to see. Someone who could cause pain and call it business as usual. Zara studied his face, searching for signs of genuine remorse or merely self-preservation. What she saw surprised her, not just regret, but a kind of awakening, as if he was seeing himself clearly for the first time. The acquisition, she said. What happens to it now? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was steady but sad. I don't know if I deserve to have my company survive this. I don't know if someone who could do what I did this morning should be trusted with the livelihoods of hundreds of employees. He looked directly into her eyes. But I know that if you give me a chance, if you choose not to destroy me, I want to spend whatever time I have left proving that people can change. That someone can learn to see what they've been blind to. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting new patterns of light and shadow across the room. In the distance, the sounds of the city continued, life going on, people moving through their days, most of them invisible to the power players who made decisions that affected their lives. There's something else you should know, Zara said finally. About why I really came back today. Daniel waited, sensing that whatever she was about to reveal would change everything once again. 6 months ago, I was engaged. The words hit him like a physical blow, though he couldn't understand why. To Richard Carlyle, the investment banker. You probably know him, old money, connected families, the kind of man my father always hoped I'd marry. Daniel nodded, remembering Carlyle from various industry events. Tall, polished, supremely confident in the way that old money bred into people. When I told him I was leaving to work as a hotel cleaner, to learn what it meant to be invisible, he laughed. Actually laughed. Said it was a phase, That I'd come to my senses once I realized how much money I was walking away from. She twisted the ring finger of her left hand, and Daniel noticed for the first time that it was bare. When I didn't come back after a week, he had me declared mentally incompetent and tried to have me committed. Said that only someone having a breakdown would walk away from billions of dollars to scrub toilets. The room seemed to grow colder. That's when I knew I could never go back to who I was. That man who claimed to love me couldn't see me any more clearly than you did this morning. He saw my bank account, my social status, my usefulness to his own ambitions. But he never saw me. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, a recognition of loneliness he'd never acknowledged in himself. Today, when you grabbed my wrist, when you dismissed me. She looked down at her hands. For just a moment, I wondered if Mrs. Washington was wrong. If people really could see beyond their own assumptions and prejudices. If someone could look at me, really look at me, and see not just what I could do for them, but who I actually was. The question hung between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they were brave enough to cross. And then I realized, Zara continued, her voice barely above a whisper, that maybe the real test isn't whether someone can see past your disguise when they know who you really are. Maybe the real test is whether they can see your worth when they think you have nothing to offer them. Their eyes met across the polished table, and in that moment, something shifted. The executive lounge, with all its symbols of power and privilege, faded away. There was only a woman who had learned what it meant to be invisible, and a man who was just beginning to understand what he had been blind to. Zara, Daniel said quietly, I failed that test this morning. Completely and utterly failed it. Yes, she agreed. You did. But if you gave me another chance, not as a business partner, not as someone who could benefit your company, but as a human being who wants to learn to see clearly, would that be possible? The afternoon sun continued to move across the sky, and somewhere in the city below, Mrs. Washington was probably tending to her small garden, carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned both the cost of invisibility and the power of being truly seen. The question of whether Daniel Morrison deserved redemption hung in the air, waiting for an answer that would determine not just the fate of two companies, but the possibility of two wounded souls finding their way toward something neither had expected to discover. The silence stretched between them like a question waiting to be answered. Outside the executive lounge, the late afternoon bustle of the hotel continued, guests checking in, staff moving efficiently through corridors, the carefully orchestrated dance of hospitality that Daniel had overseen for years without truly seeing the individual people who made it possible. There's something I need to show you, Zara said finally, reaching into her briefcase. She pulled out a worn leather journal, its pages filled with careful handwriting. I've been keeping a record. Not for legal purposes or evidence, just to remember. She opened the journal to a page near the beginning, her finger tracing the neat script. Day 1. Maria from housekeeping brought me coffee during my break. She didn't know who I was, had nothing to gain from the kindness. But when she saw I was struggling with the industrial vacuum, she took 10 minutes to show me the proper technique. Said her grandmother always told her that work done with care honors both the worker and the space. Daniel listened, something shifting in his chest. Day 15, Mr. Chen from maintenance, no relation to our CFO, found me crying in the supply closet. I just finished cleaning room 847, where a guest had left trash everywhere and a note calling housekeeping lazy immigrants even though the room was spotless when I finished. She looked up at him. Mr. Chen didn't ask questions. Just sat with me for 5 minutes, told me his story of coming to America 30 years ago, how he'd built a life one honest day's work at a time. Said dignity wasn't something anyone could take from you. You had to give it away. Daniel felt his throat tighten. In 8 years of managing this hotel, he'd never known these stories, never seen these moments of human connection happening right under his nose. Day 43, Zara continued, flipping to another page. Mrs. Rodriguez from room service taught me her grandmother's recipe for café con leche during the night shift. Said food made with love tastes different, whether you're cooking for billionaires or for your own family. We talked about her daughter's graduation, her dreams of becoming a nurse. She closed the journal gently, as if it held something precious. For 6 months, I was surrounded by people who saw me as I was, not as what I could do for them, but as someone deserving of basic human kindness. People who had every reason to be invisible themselves, yet somehow managed to see and care for others. Daniel stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city with different eyes. I built my career on efficiency, he said quietly. On systems and metrics and maintaining standards. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing the people who made it all possible. When did you first know you wanted to work in hospitality? Zara asked, joining him at the window. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried traces of a younger, more hopeful version of himself. I was 12. My parents divorced, and my mom worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. During summer breaks, she'd bring me to the hotel where she cleaned rooms. He paused, the memory clearly painful. I'd sit in the hallway with my books while she worked, and I watched how the guests looked through her like she wasn't there. How the managers spoke to her like she was disposable. Zara felt something soften in her chest. I promised myself that when I grew up, I'd run a place where everyone mattered. Where the people who did the hardest work would be treated with respect and dignity. His laugh was bitter. Somewhere along the way, I became exactly what I'd sworn to fight against. What happened to your mother? She died when I was in college. Never got to see me succeed, never got to work anywhere that treated her like she deserved. His voice cracked slightly. This morning, when I grabbed your wrist, when I said those things, I became every manager who ever made my mother feel small. They stood together in the growing silence, 2 people who had lost their way for different reasons but somehow found themselves in the same place of reckoning. Can I ask you something? Daniel said. When you were working here, cleaning these rooms, facing the prejudice and invisibility, why didn't you quit? Why put yourself through that? Zara smiled, and for the first time all day, it reached her eyes. Because of moments like the one with Maria and the coffee. Because of Mr. Chen sitting with me when I cried. Because of Mrs. Rodriguez sharing her grandmother's recipe. She turned to face him fully. I learned that dignity isn't about the work you do or the money you make. It's about how you treat people and how you allow yourself to be treated. And how you see people, Daniel added quietly. Yes. They were standing closer now, and Daniel could see the faint scar on her wrist where his fingers had gripped too tightly that morning. The sight made him feel physically sick. I'm so sorry, he whispered, reaching out instinctively and then stopping himself. Not just for this morning, but for becoming someone who could do that to another person. For letting success make me blind to suffering. I know you are, Zara said, and there was something in her voice that hadn't been there before, not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of it. The acquisition, Daniel said suddenly. I need you to know, whatever you decide about the business, I understand. If working with me would compromise your values or bring you pain, then walk away. Some things matter more than money. Zara studied his face, seeing past the polished executive exterior to the 12-year-old boy who had sat in hotel hallways, watching his mother be dismissed and diminished. What if, she said slowly, instead of walking away, we tried something different? What do you mean? What if we used this acquisition not just as a business transaction, but as a chance to build something better? A company that values people over profit margins, that sees employees as whole human beings rather than expendable resources. Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope, mixed with terror at the magnitude of what she was suggesting. You'd be willing to work with me? After everything that happened. I'd be willing to work with the man I saw just now, the one who remembers his mother's dignity, who wants to honor her memory by doing better. The question is, can that man coexist with the executive who built this empire? Before Daniel could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from his assistant manager. Board meeting in 30 minutes. Investors are here. Need your decision on the PR crisis management strategy. The outside world was calling, demanding answers, seeking damage control for a situation that couldn't be managed away with conventional corporate tactics. They want me to craft a narrative, Daniel said, showing her the message. Something that minimizes the impact, protects the brand, maybe positions this as a misunderstanding that's been resolved. And what do you want to do? Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just the successful businesswoman or the wronged employee, but the complete human being who had risked everything to learn a lesson about compassion he should have known all along. I want to tell the truth, he said. All of it. What I did, why it was wrong, and how a remarkable woman taught me to see what I'd been blind to. He paused. Even if it destroys me professionally. Zara felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a recognition of genuine courage, of someone choosing principle over self-preservation. It might not destroy you, she said softly. It might be the foundation of building something worth saving. The afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting longer shadows across the executive lounge where their confrontation had begun hours earlier. But now, instead of anger and humiliation, the space held the tentative beginnings of understanding. Two wounded souls discovering that healing was possible, that people could change, and that sometimes the most profound connections emerged from the ashes of our worst moments. There's one more thing, Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something I didn't write in my journal because I wasn't sure I understood it myself. What? Today, when you realized who I was, when you understood what you'd done, the look in your eyes wasn't just shame. It was recognition. Like you were seeing yourself clearly for the first time in years. Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. That's when I knew, she continued, that maybe Mrs. Washington was right. Maybe the real question isn't whether someone can avoid making terrible mistakes. Maybe it's whether they can face the truth about themselves and choose to become someone better. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, two people who had started the day as strangers found themselves standing at the edge of something neither had expected. Not just business partnership, but the possibility of genuine understanding, respect, and perhaps something even deeper. The question was whether they would have the courage to step forward together into whatever came next. The boardroom on the 40th floor buzzed with tension as Daniel entered, his tie still loose, his hair disheveled from the afternoon's revelations. 12 investors sat around the polished conference table, their expressions ranging from concerned to openly hostile. At the head of the table, his own board chairman, Robert Sterling, looked like a man preparing to deliver a death sentence. Daniel, Sterling's voice cut through the murmur of conversations. Sit down. We need to discuss the crisis management strategy for today's incident. Daniel took his seat, acutely aware that Zara was 3 floors below, probably facing similar scrutiny from her own board. The plan had been simple: attend their respective emergency meetings, then reconvene to discuss their path forward. But as he looked around the table at faces he'd worked with for years, Daniel felt the weight of corporate machinery preparing to crush the fragile understanding he and Zara had begun to build. The story is already leaking, announced Jennifer Walsh, the head of public relations, sliding a tablet across the table. Hotel staff have been talking. Someone took a video of the aftermath. You can't see what happened, but you can hear raised voices, see the crowd gathered around the executive lounge. Daniel's stomach dropped as he watched the shaky phone footage. Even without clear audio, the body language was damning. Him standing over Zara, the gathered executives, the visible tension. It's manageable, Sterling said briskly. Jennifer's crafted a statement. Employee misconduct. Terminated immediately. Case closed. We paint this as a disgruntled worker trying to cause trouble, maybe even attempting some kind of scam. What? Daniel's voice cracked like a whip across the room. The cleaning lady, Sterling continued, not noticing Daniel's expression. We can't have her running around telling stories about how our management treats staff. Jennifer's already prepared the documentation. Chronic tardiness, poor performance reviews, multiple complaints from guests. That's completely fabricated, Daniel said, his voice dangerously quiet. Of course it is, Sterling replied with a dismissive wave. But it's plausible, and more importantly, it's what we need right now. One problem employee, dealt with swiftly and appropriately. Shows we have high standards. Jennifer nodded enthusiastically. We've also prepared character witnesses, other staff members who will testify to her difficult attitude, unprofessional behavior. It's standard crisis management. Daniel felt the room spinning around him. These people, his board, his business partners, were casually discussing the destruction of an innocent woman's reputation to save his career. They were talking about Zara like she was a problem to be eliminated, not a human being who deserved dignity and truth. And the best part, Sterling continued, is that she's just a cleaner. No one important will care what happens to her. This whole thing dies in 48 hours, maximum. Just a cleaner. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. In that moment, he saw himself through Zara's eyes. Not just the man who had grabbed her wrist that morning, but the man who had built a company culture where this kind of callous disregard for human dignity was considered normal, even praiseworthy. "There's something you need to know," Daniel said, his voice steadier than he felt. "The woman we're talking about, her name is Zara Pemberton." The room fell silent. "That's impossible," Sterling said after a moment. "Zara Pemberton disappeared months ago. Besides, what would someone like her be doing working as a cleaner?" Daniel finished. "Learning what it feels like to be invisible. Understanding how people like us treat people we consider beneath us." The color drained from Sterling's face as the implications hit him. "Jesus Christ," whispered Marcus Thompson, one of the major investors. "If Zara Pemberton was working here, and you, Daniel, do you have any idea what this means?" "It means," Jennifer said, her voice rising to near hysteria, "that we need to completely rethink our approach. We can't attack someone of her stature. We need to spin this as a misunderstanding, maybe even turn it into a positive." "No." Daniel's voice cut through the panic like a blade. Every eye in the room turned to him. "We're not spinning anything. We're not crafting narratives or managing optics or destroying anyone's reputation." He stood slowly, his decision crystallizing with each word. "We're going to tell the truth." "Daniel," Sterling's voice carried a warning. "Think carefully about what you're saying. The truth, as you put it, could destroy everything we've built. The stock price, the investor confidence, the acquisition deals." "The acquisition deal is with Pemberton Holdings," Daniel said quietly. "The company Zara will inherit completely when she turns 30 next month." The silence that followed was deafening. "She owns us," Thompson whispered. "She literally owns our future. And you, what did you do to her?" Before Daniel could answer, his phone rang. Zara's number. He answered it immediately, putting it on speaker. "Daniel." Her voice filled the room, but it sounded different, strained, angry in a way he hadn't heard before. "We need to talk. Now." "I'm in a board meeting." "So am I." Her voice cracked slightly. "And I just learned something that changes everything." Daniel's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" "The employee reviews, Daniel. The performance documentation. The witness statements about my supposed misconduct." Her voice was like ice. "All dated and filed before this morning's incident ever happened." The blood drained from Daniel's face as he looked around the table at his board members. Sterling was staring at his phone, Jennifer was frantically typing on her laptop, and the other investors looked like they were watching a car accident in slow motion. "Zara, I had nothing to do with." "Your head of PR just sent these documents to 3 major media outlets," Zara continued, her voice breaking, "painting me as a disgruntled, unstable employee who was planning to cause trouble. Making it look like this morning was some kind of calculated scheme." Daniel spun to face Jennifer, who had gone completely pale. "You did what?" It was standard protocol," Jennifer stammered. "We had to get ahead of the story." "You sent fabricated documents about Zara Pemberton to the media." Daniel's voice rose to a shout. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I thought she was just a cleaning lady." Jennifer's voice cracked. "I was protecting the company." Through the phone, Daniel could hear Zara's sharp intake of breath. "Just a cleaning lady," she repeated, her voice hollow. "Even after everything we talked about, even after this afternoon, that's still how your people see me. That's still who you are." "Zara, no. That's not. I didn't know they were doing this. I would never have authorized." "But you created a company culture where it was acceptable," she said, and her words cut deeper than any scream could have. "You built an organization where destroying an innocent person's reputation to protect profits is considered standard protocol." Sterling grabbed the phone from Daniel's hand. "Ms. Pemberton, let's all take a breath here. This is clearly a misunderstanding that got out of hand. I'm sure we can reach some kind of arrangement." "Mr. Sterling." Zara's voice was deadly quiet. "In the last hour, Your company has attempted to systematically destroy my reputation, my character, and my credibility. You've sent falsified documents to major media outlets. You've coordinated witness testimony that's completely fabricated. Now, let's not get dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being accurate. And accurate is what I'll be when I hold a press conference tomorrow morning to explain exactly what happened here today. All of it. The room erupted in panicked voices, but Daniel heard only the sound of his own heart breaking. "Zara," he said, his voice barely audible above the chaos. "Please. Don't let what they did destroy what we found this afternoon. Don't let their actions define who I really am." The silence stretched out like eternity. "Daniel," she said finally, and her voice held a sadness so profound it seemed to fill the room. "This afternoon, I thought maybe I'd found someone who could see past their own prejudices. Someone who could learn to value people over profit. You did. You have. But you're not alone in this world. You're part of a system, a culture, a way of doing business that treats people like me as collateral damage." Her voice broke slightly. "And I can't. I won't be invisible again. Not even for you." The line went dead. Daniel stared at the phone in his hand, feeling everything he'd thought he could build with Zara crumble around him. The boardroom continued to buzz with crisis management discussions, stock price projections, and damage control strategies, but all he could hear was the echo of her voice saying she wouldn't be invisible again. Not even for him. In trying to protect him, his own people had destroyed the one thing that mattered most, Zara's trust. They had proven that despite his personal growth, despite his recognition of his failures, he was still part of a machine that crushed people like her without a second thought. And tomorrow morning, the world would learn exactly what that machine was capable of. Sterling was already barking orders about legal strategies and media responses, but Daniel knew it was too late. The shatter point had been reached, and everything worth saving had just slipped through his fingers like sand. The man who had grabbed Zara's wrist that morning had been ignorant and prejudiced. But the man who had let his company systematically destroy her reputation while he sat in a boardroom unable to stop it, that man might be beyond redemption. When the systems we're part of betray our personal growth, how do we choose between loyalty and principle? What would you do if your own organization acted against everything you'd learned was right? Share your thoughts, because sometimes the hardest battles are with our own side. The penthouse suite of the Grandview Hotel had always been Daniel's sanctuary, 40 floors above the city, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the empire he'd built. But tonight, as he sat alone on the leather couch with a glass of untouched whiskey, the space felt more like a prison than a palace. The silence was deafening. No board meetings to attend, no crisis management calls to take. Sterling had made it clear that Daniel was to lay low until the legal team could assess the full scope of their liability. The irony wasn't lost on him. After years of wielding power over others, he had been rendered as invisible as the cleaning staff he'd once overlooked. His phone lay silent on the coffee table. No calls from Zara. No hope of redemption. The city stretched out below him, millions of lights representing millions of people going about their lives, people he had never truly seen, never truly considered. Somewhere out there, Zara was preparing for a press conference that would destroy everything he'd built. And he couldn't blame her. Daniel closed his eyes and let himself remember his mother's face, not the tired, worn expression she'd worn during those final years of working multiple jobs, but the way she'd looked when he was young, before divorce and poverty had ground her down. She used to tell him stories about the hotel where she cleaned, about the small kindnesses between staff members that management never noticed. The real measure of a person, she'd said once, isn't how they treat people who can help them. It's how they treat people who can't. By that measure, Daniel had failed spectacularly. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Daniel wasn't expecting anyone. Sterling had instructed him to avoid all contact until morning. But when he opened the door, he found Mr. Chen from maintenance standing in the hallway, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Mr. Morrison? I'm sorry to bother you so late, but, well, Maria and we heard about what happened with Miss Zara." Daniel's throat tightened. Even now, the staff who had worked alongside Zara for months still called her Miss Zara, with the same respect they'd shown her when she was just another cleaner. "Mr. Chen, you shouldn't be here. If Sterling finds out." "Mr. Sterling don't know Miss Zara like we do." The older man's accent was thick, but his words were clear. That girl, she got a good heart. She work hard, treat everyone with respect. When my grandson got sick last month, she stayed late to help me finish my rounds without being asked. Daniel stepped aside, gesturing for Mr. Chen to enter. The maintenance worker looked around the opulent penthouse with the same careful respect he brought to everything. Maria wanted to come too, but she's scared about losing her job. We all scared now. Mr. Chen sat down heavily on the edge of the couch. But we can't let you all destroy Miss Zara's reputation when we know the truth. The truth. She never caused no trouble. Never complained, even when guests were rude. Even when. Mr. Chen paused, studying Daniel's face. Even when management treated her poorly. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. His staff had seen everything. They had watched him humiliate Zara, had witnessed the casual cruelty he displayed, and yet here was Mr. Chen, risking his job to defend her. Why are you telling me this? The older man was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands folded in his lap. My wife and I, we came to this country 35 years ago with nothing. Worked in hotels, restaurants, cleaning offices, wherever we could find work. Most managers, they never saw us as people. Just as hands to do the work they didn't want to do. He looked up at Daniel with eyes that held decades of accumulated dignity. But a few, very few, they were different. They learned our names, asked about our families, treated us like we mattered. Those are the managers who built something good, something that lasted. The implication hung in the air between them. Miss Zara, she saw us from the first day. Really saw us. Asked about our families, remembered our stories, shared her lunch when someone forgot theirs. Mr. Chen's voice grew stronger. That's not the kind of person who schemes or causes trouble. That's the kind of person who makes a place better just by being there. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, not just shame, but a desperate longing to be the kind of person Mr. Chen was describing, the kind of person Zara had seen him capable of becoming during their afternoon conversation. What do you think I should do? Mr. Chen smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. My grandmother used to say that when you make a mistake, you got two choices. You can spend your time explaining why it wasn't really your fault, or you can spend your time making sure it never happens again. After Mr. Chen left, Daniel sat alone in the growing darkness, the city lights blurring through tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in years. His phone buzzed with text messages from board members, lawyers, and PR specialists, all focused on damage control and liability management. But their voices seemed to come from another world, a world where protecting power mattered more than protecting people. At 2 a.m., Daniel made his choice. He opened his laptop and began to type, his fingers moving with more certainty than he'd felt in months. Not a press release or a legal statement, but a letter, raw, honest, and completely unfiltered by corporate strategy. To Zara Pemberton, and to everyone who has ever been made to feel invisible. My name is Daniel Morrison, and yesterday morning I became everything I once swore I would never be. I grabbed a woman's wrist because I thought I had the right to control her. I dismissed her worth because of the color of her skin and the uniform she wore. I called her you people because in that moment, I saw her not as a human being deserving of dignity, but as a problem to be managed. That woman was Zara Pemberton, but that's not why my actions were wrong. They would have been equally wrong if she were anyone, Maria from housekeeping, Mr. Chen from maintenance, or any of the dozens of employees I failed to truly see over the years. I was raised by a single mother who cleaned hotel rooms to keep us afloat. I watched managers treat her like she was disposable, and I promised myself I would be different. Instead, I became worse, because I should have known better. This morning, my board attempted to destroy Ms. Pemberton's reputation with fabricated documents and false witness statements. I did not authorize this action, but I created the corporate culture that made it possible. I built a company where treating people as disposable was considered standard protocol. I cannot undo what I did. I cannot erase the pain I caused or the trust one betrayed. But I can ensure it never happens again. Effective immediately, I am resigning as CEO of Morrison Hotels. I am liquidating my personal shares and establishing a fund for employees who have faced discrimination or harassment in hospitality industry jobs. I am also implementing a new management structure that puts employee dignity and worker rights at the center of all business decisions. To Ms. Pemberton specifically, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. But I want you to know that our conversation yesterday afternoon showed me who I could be, who I should have been all along. You saw something in me that I had lost, and even though my actions have destroyed any chance of earning your trust, you gave me back my humanity. To my employees, you deserve better than what I have given you. You deserve to be seen, heard, and valued for who you are, not just what you can produce. That starts now. And to anyone who has ever been made to feel invisible by someone in power, you matter. Your dignity is not negotiable. Your worth is not determined by your job title, your bank account, or the assumptions others make about you. I am stepping away from the business world to spend time learning what I should have known all along: how to see people clearly, how to use whatever privilege I have in service of others, and how to build something worthy of the second chance I don't deserve but desperately hope to earn. This is not a PR strategy. This is not damage control. This is simply the truth from a man who finally learned to see himself clearly, thanks to a remarkable woman who had the courage to let herself be seen. Daniel Morrison. He read the letter 3 times, making no changes. Then he sent it simultaneously to every major news outlet, business publication, and social media platform he could think of. He sent copies to his board, his investors, and his lawyers, all of whom would be furious by morning. And finally, he sent it to Zara. No accompanying message. No request for forgiveness or reconciliation. Just the letter itself, and the hope that somewhere in its pages, she might recognize the man she had glimpsed in the executive lounge that afternoon, the one who remembered his mother's dignity and wanted to honor it. As dawn broke over the city, Daniel sat by the window watching the sun rise over a world that would soon know exactly who he really was. His career was over. His reputation would never recover. The empire he'd built was crumbling around him. But for the first time in years, he felt truly awake. The choice had been made. The only question now was whether it was too late for the choice to matter. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the renovated community center in South Carolina, casting warm light across the freshly painted walls. Daniel Morrison knelt on the hardwood floor, carefully measuring baseboards with the same precision he had once applied to quarterly reports and acquisition deals. His hands were different now, calloused from honest work, stained with paint and wood polish instead of expensive ink. The tailored suits had been replaced by work clothes, the platinum watch traded for a simple timepiece that told only the time, not his status. "Mr. Daniel, you missed a spot over there," called 8-year-old Keisha Washington, pointing to a corner where primer showed through the yellow paint. "Yes, Daniel replied with a smile, dipping his brush back into the paint can. "Can't have Mrs. Washington's community center looking anything less than perfect." Mrs. Washington, the woman whose husband had died watching his family's hotel empire crumble, sat in her wheelchair near the window, overseeing the renovation with the same careful attention she had once given to her own business. At 83, her body was frail, but her eyes remained sharp, kind, and infinitely wise. "That boy's learned how to listen," she said to Maria, who was hanging new curtains with the help of several volunteers from the Morrison Hotel's Employee Assistance Program. 6 months ago, he would have been telling us what we needed. Now he asks what we want. The community center had been Daniel's first project after liquidating his assets, not a grand gesture of charity, but a quiet commitment to rebuilding what corporate greed had destroyed. The space would house job training programs, childcare services, and meeting rooms for local organizations. It would be run by the community, for the community, with Daniel serving as nothing more than a volunteer laborer. "Miss Zara's here," called Mr. Chen from the doorway, his voice carrying the same respectful warmth it always had. Daniel's heart stopped. In 6 months since his public resignation and confession, he had received no word from Zara. The press conference she had threatened never materialized. His own letter had made it unnecessary. The media storm that followed had been brutal but brief. The business world moved quickly past scandals when there were new profits to chase. But Zara's silence had been deafening. Daniel had sent no follow-up letters, made no attempts at contact. Some bridges, once burned, could not be rebuilt through persistence, only through patient demonstration of change. She entered the community center wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger than her 28 years. But her eyes, those dark eyes that had held such pain 6 months ago, seemed different. Calmer. At peace in a way that professional success had never achieved. "Mrs. Washington," Zara said, crossing directly to the elderly woman and taking her hands. "The center looks beautiful." "Child, you should see what your young man has accomplished," Mrs. Washington replied, her eyes twinkling. "Works harder than men half his age, and never once complained about doing the humblest jobs." "He's not my young man, Mrs. Washington," Zara said quietly, but her eyes found Daniel across the room, and something flickered there, not love, not yet, but recognition of something that might be possible. Daniel set down his paintbrush and approached slowly, aware that everyone in the room was watching, waiting to see how this long-awaited reunion would unfold. "Zara," he said simply, "thank you for coming." "I read your quarterly reports," she said, and for a moment Daniel was confused. He hadn't filed any quarterly report since his resignation. Then he realized she meant the letters he had been writing to Mrs. Washington, describing his work, his learning, his slow journey toward becoming someone worthy of the second chance he'd been given. "I didn't know you were reading them." Mrs. Washington shared them. "Said I needed to see that people really can change, if they're willing to do the work." They stood facing each other in the bright morning light, surrounded by the fruits of honest labor and genuine community. 6 months ago, this same building had been a shell, broken windows, peeling paint, dreams deferred by economic reality. Now it hummed with life and possibility. "I owe you an apology," Zara said, surprising everyone who could hear her. "When I walked away that day, I was angry at the system you represented. But I painted you with the same brush I accused you of using on me. I saw you as your worst moment instead of your full humanity." Daniel shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. I earned your anger, your distrust." "Maybe. But Mrs. Washington taught me something these past months." Zara glanced at the elderly woman, who was pretending not to listen while clearly hanging on every word. She said that holding on to anger at someone who's genuinely trying to change is like refusing to let a wound heal because you're afraid of letting go of the pain. The silence stretched between them, but it was different from the silences they had shared 6 months ago. This one held possibility instead of resentment, hope instead of hurt. "Walk with me?" Zara asked. They stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, leaving behind the sounds of renovation and community building. The neighborhood around them was modest but well-tended, small houses with flower gardens, children playing in yards, the kind of working-class dignity that had been threatened by corporate expansion. Pemberton Holdings completed the Morrison Hotel's acquisition last month, Zara said as they walked down the tree-lined street. Daniel nodded. "I heard. I hope the new management treats the employees better than I did." "They will. I made sure of that." She paused at a small park where children were playing on swings and slides. "But I didn't come here to talk about business." "Then why did you come?" Zara was quiet for a long time, watching the children play, listening to their laughter echo through the autumn air. "Do you remember what you asked me that afternoon in the executive lounge? About whether someone could earn a second chance?" "Yes." "I've been thinking about that question for 6 months. About what it means to forgive, to trust again, to believe that people can truly change." She turned to face him, and her expression was open, vulnerable in a way he had never seen before. "I think I have an answer." Daniel's heart began to race, but he forced himself to remain still, to let her speak without pushing or presuming. Second chances aren't about erasing the past or pretending the pain didn't happen. They're about choosing to see someone's present truth instead of being trapped by their past actions. She reached out and took his paint-stained hand in her own, her fingers tracing the calluses that 6 months of honest work had created. "The man who grabbed my wrist that morning, I can't forgive him, because he was operating from ignorance and prejudice and unexamined privilege. But this man," she squeezed his hand gently, "the one who gave up everything to rebuild what he had torn down, who chose truth over reputation, who learned to see people clearly, him, I can not only forgive, but respect. Maybe even love." The word hung in the air between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. "Zara," Daniel whispered, "I don't deserve." "None of us deserves love," she said softly. "That's what makes it grace. That's what makes it powerful enough to transform us." They stood together in the small park, two people who had found their way to each other through pain, growth, and the kind of honest reckoning that strips away everything false and leaves only what's essential. Around them, life continued. Children playing, parents watching, the ordinary magic of community unfolding in real time. So what happens now? Daniel asked. Zara smiled, and it was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Now we build something together. Not a business empire or a corporate dynasty, but something that matters. Something that honors every person who ever felt invisible, who ever needed to be seen. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, architectural plans for a chain of community centers, job training facilities, and social service organizations that would span the region. The Pemberton Morrison Foundation for Human Dignity, she said. If you're interested in a partnership that might actually change lives instead of just making money. Daniel looked at the plans, at the woman who had taught him to see clearly, at the future they might build together if he was brave enough to accept grace when it was offered. I'd be honored, he said, and meant it more than he had ever meant anything in his life. As the sun climbed higher in the autumn sky, two people who had started as strangers, who had wounded and healed each other, who had learned the hardest lessons about prejudice and forgiveness, walked hand in hand back toward the community center where Mrs. Washington was waiting with her infinite wisdom and knowing smile. The executive lounge where their story began felt like another lifetime. Another world. This was real, this work, this community, this love that had grown from the ashes of their worst moments and best intentions. Behind them, the laughter of children filled the air, and ahead of them lay the possibility of building something beautiful from the ruins of what they used to be. Some love stories begin with a first glance across a crowded room. Theirs had begun with a moment of cruelty that revealed who they really were and who they could become. And perhaps that made it stronger, a love built not on illusion, but on truth, not on perfection, but on the courage to grow, not on avoiding pain, but on choosing healing. As they reached the community center door, Zara paused and looked back at the small park where children continued to play. My father used to say that the measure of a business is how much money it makes, she said thoughtfully. Mrs. Washington taught me that the measure of a life is how many people feel seen because of how you chose to see them. Daniel followed her gaze to the children, to the parents, to the neighbors who had welcomed him despite knowing his story. Then we have a lot of work to do, he said. Yes, Zara replied, squeezing his hand as they stepped back into the warmth and light of the community center. We do. And in that moment, surrounded by the sounds of renovation and hope, two people who had learned the hardest lessons about humanity began the most important work of their lives, not building an empire, but building a legacy of dignity, one person at a time. Love that grows from our mistakes can be the strongest kind, but only if we're willing to do the hard work of becoming better. What's the most important lesson someone has taught you about seeing people clearly? Share your story below, because sometimes our greatest growth comes from our most humbling moments.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.